Sheriff's Communication Dispatcher 5538.
Well, I've got a situation. Last night, a friend of mine asked me to come over. She said that she had possibly killed her stepdad. I don't know if she really did this.
Well, what exactly are you trying to report?
It sounds like she killed this guy.
It was the first day of a new year. The Sheriff's Department received a call from a guy that said she confessed to drugging him, suffocating him, and strangling him to death.
Jade was very cool, very popular. I could not believe what they were saying that Jade did. Tom Merriman is Jade's stepdad, and 100% she loved Tom. She took care of him. They lived next door to each other. She made him dinner. She was always there for him.
Detectives knew they had a phone call from her good friend that she confessed to murdering Tom Merriman, so they got a search warrant. We don't have to prove motive, but we want to show a motive.
The photos.
The photos.
She accidentally bumped his computer and the screensaver came out.
The screensaver is a nude photograph of her in the shower. She was able to find a lot more nude photos of her.
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
It was the most violating, just awful, gut-wrenching feeling ever. I felt sick. I couldn't even touch my own skin.
She was beyond freaked out. She's sleeping with a knife. She is scared for her life.
Yes.
Did you love Tom? Did Tom love you?
Yes.
I mean, did you want your stepfather dead? Did you stand over him with a plastic bag and pull tight to keep him from breathing?
No.
Did you wrap a cord around his neck?
No.
And did you strangle him?
No.
So you have this supposed confession of her saying she strangled him, but no evidence of strangulation. Your own strangulation expert said it's not strangulation.
That's right.
So your big bomb
Fizzled. It was gone.
San Diego County, California. An idyllic place. Most of the time.
I stewed on this all night. I barely slept, and I'm scared to death. I don't want to be a part of this. I didn't have anything to do with her.
That frightened phone call came in New Year's Day, 2021. The caller said his one-time girlfriend may have committed a murder.
The Sheriff's Department received a call from a guy that said, my friend confessed to me last night that she murdered her stepfather.
San Diego County Deputy DA Jorge Del Portillo.
He told deputies, hey, I don't know if what she's saying is true. I didn't see him, but this is something I had to tell the police.
The alleged victim was a 64-year-old man named Tom Merriman. He lived here.
I liked him. I thought he was very nice.
Ramona Hamilton and her husband George were Tom's neighbors. Ramona knew him better, and she found out Tom also ran an unusual business.
More milkweed, more milkweed, more milkweed.
A butterfly farm.
I'm a gardener and I love butterflies.
Pat Flanagan also likes butterflies. He was Tom Merriman's business partner out at the farm.
He was my best friend.
Did he become kind of a butterfly expert?
Oh, he is a butterfly expert.
You say he is.
Yeah.
You still talk about him in the present tense?
Yeah. I do.
It was right here on December 31st, 2020, that Tom Merriman was last seen alive. Ramona and George saw him in his stepdaughter's SUV in the driveway.
And he was sitting on this side, the passenger side, with his feet out and this walker out in front of him. And he looked like hell.
Tom had just spent more than 2 weeks in the hospital and a rehab center after a bad fall. He also had heart and liver problems.
He looked awful. I don't even know if he knew me.
But at the time, it just seemed like maybe he got sent home from the hospital, heavily drugged.
That's all we knew. That's all we knew.
Hi, sweetie. And then George saw Tom's stepdaughter, 37-year-old Jade Janks. Tom Merriman had come into Jade's life when she was 14, marrying her mom. Jade and Tom were apparently close. She lived right next door. On this day, Jade had just driven him home.
And he called her his daughter.
He called Jade his daughter?
Yes.
Right.
They seem close.
And they seemed very close. She was fixing dinner for him every night. She seemed to take care of him.
What'd you think of Jade?
I thought she was a very pretty woman.
Jade had done some work in Ramona's apartment.
She was an interior decorator.
That's Jade. She can be a tomboy and a girly girl all in the same day. She can get herself dirty for work, carrying rocks and concrete in her pickup truck, and we're dressed up, ready to go to like a nice, fancy dinner.
Heather Pierce grew up next door to Jade in San Diego County.
Jade was very cool. I loved being around her.
Jade was 13 years older.
She's definitely a little more than a big sister and a little less than a mom. Her energy is just very strong. Loving and caring and genuine. And so when you're around her, like, you feel good.
She also knew Jade's stepdad, Tom Merriman.
I think she always just loved him and cared about him.
Back at Tom's place in Solana Beach, it was now January 1st, the day after he'd gotten back from the hospital. The day after George and Ramona had seen him looking so poorly in the driveway. This time, they only saw Jade in the driveway. She was standing by a pile of trash and boxes.
I saw her out at the side here with the boxes and cartons. A little while later, there was a knock on the door, and she come to the door to tell me that she'd made a mess down here, but she'd clean it up later.
Where was the pile?
What about
Right here.
We see what that dirt is right there?
Yeah, like right in this area here?
Right
Yep.
there.
It was a few hours later when law enforcement pulled into their driveway.
I'm scared to death. I don't want to be a part of this.
They came to investigate that strange phone call, the one that claimed Tom Merriman had been murdered.
They were trying to find Tom. Where is Tom? They walked by this pile of trash in the driveway. They knocked on his door. They went inside.
They didn't find Tom, but they did see his stepdaughter.
When they saw Jade Janks driving out of her driveway, they pulled her over, brought her in for questioning, and asked that very question, where is Tom?
Jade said she was cold, so they gave her a blanket.
Well, we're trying to find Tom. Do you know where Tom is?
No.
His family hasn't seen him for over 48 hours, so.
He just got released from the hospital yesterday.
Okay. Did you see him yesterday?
Yeah, I picked him up from the hospital.
Okay. Do you know where he went?
No. Well, can you tell me, other than he's just missing?
We don't know where he's at. We're trying to find him.
Eventually, they let Jade go, but there was still no sign of Tom. Officers spent all night combing through his apartment, looking for clues.
Then, just after the first morning light, one of the officers was walking down the driveway toward Tom's apartment when she saw that pile of trash. It was just about here. I have a picture of it here. There's a wheelbarrow there, some boxes, some bags.
She moved a trash bag from that trash and immediately saw the silhouette of a man.
And there he was, Tom Merriman.
Tom Merriman laid dead and buried. Never seen that. I've never seen a case where a body was buried under a pile of trash in the driveway.
The The apparent crime scene was smack in the middle of the driveway of this lush compound, just a mile from the beach.
He was wearing the hospital bracelet that he was just in the hospital, the same t-shirt and the same pajamas that he was discharged. As soon as they found the body, they knew we have our suspect, and they made the arrest.
On the morning of January 2nd, 2021, Jade Janks was arrested and charged with Tom Merriman's murder, but things were about to get complicated.
She lawyered up and didn't want to answer any more questions.
So authorities continued to work the case, starting with that phone call.
It sounds like she killed this guy.
That call had come from that friend of Jade's, a man named Adam Siplak. He told police she'd called him to her apartment, and then she asked him for a favor.
And asked me to move the body with her. And
Okay.
I said, I can't help you, and I never saw the body.
Adam Siplak may not have seen the body that night, but eventually he did tell police that Jade confessed to him, that she knocked Tom out with an overdose of medicine and then strangled him. It was a pretty dramatic story, and authorities were confident that the autopsy would confirm it, that there'd be physical evidence that Tom Merriman was strangled to death. But that's not what happened.
I was actually there for the autopsy.
Assistant DA Teresa Pham, who led the investigation, talked to the medical examiner.
So what they found was, unfortunately, not a lot of physical evidence.
Right, so you have this supposed confession of her saying she strangled him, but no evidence of strangulation.
That's right.
The final autopsy report created even more of a challenge for the prosecutors. It said that the cause of Tom Merriman's death was acute zolpidem intoxication. Zolpidem is the generic name for the sleeping pill Ambien.
Is it possible that Tom Merriman died by accident? He was in poor health. It's not that many pills that he took.
Certainly it's possible, but the evidence belied that notion. This was no accident.
But even if the autopsy didn't point to strangulation, investigators say other evidence clearly pointed to murder.
Jade's cell phone was a gold mine.
It was a gold mine.
Jade's phone was full of texts.
How would you categorize those text messages?
Suspicious.
Incriminating.
A plan.
According to prosecutors, that plan was to get rid of Tom Merriman, one way or another. Investigators say it all started on December 23rd. That's about a week before Tom's body was found. Tom was in the hospital after that bad fall. Jade says she was cleaning up his apartment when she found something.
So she's at Tom's apartment, and his laptop, I guess it must have been in sleep mode or something like that, but she knocked into it and it woke up, and on the screensaver is a nude photograph of her in the shower.
And there was more, much more.
She must have had his passwords, so once she was able to get into his laptop was when she was able to find a lot more nude photos of her.
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
These were photos that she took willingly with her partner at the time. Some were of her in the shower, naked.
Authorities don't know how Merriman got those pictures, but Jade says she never gave them to him. And prosecutors say she panicked.
In her words, she was beyond freaked out. That's what she wrote to a friend, that she couldn't shower alone, that she was vomiting at just the idea of looking at a shower based on what she had discovered. She's sleeping with a knife on the nightstand just in case he comes early home from the hospital.
According to prosecutors, that's when Jade launches her plan. How? One of her friends connects her with a guy the prosecutors called the Fixer.
There's a text message where he tells Jade, if you have a problem, I can fix it for you. And that's how we came up with the label, the Fixer.
The so-called Fixer was a man named Alan Roach.
Who is Alan Roach?
Alan Roach is a guy, he's a security guard, that's what he does. But I think he makes himself out to be someone else that he's not. We were thinking Jade views him as the character in Pulp Fiction, someone that you reach out to when you want one of your problems fixed. And that's what he was. He was the fixer.
He was the fixer. Is Alan a hitman?
He is not a hitman. What's important is, what does Jade think Alan is?
Prosecutors say Jade wanted her fixer to help her get rid of Tom.
She had a plan that she stuck to.
The plan was murder.
The plan was murder.
It was December 2022, 2 years after Tom Merriman's body was found under that pile of garbage, and Jade Janks was about to stand trial for his murder.
And let me just ask you flat out, did Jade Janks murder her stepfather, Tom Merriman?
Jade has maintained her innocence throughout this entire incident.
Jade's attorney, Mark Carlos. He insists this was not a murder and says Jade had no reason to kill her stepfather.
Finding nude photos of yourself on a stepfather's computer would make you angry, you know, might make you break off relationships with him, but enough to kill somebody? I don't think so.
He says Tom's death was an unfortunate accident brought on by his poor health and self-administered prescription drugs.
I think he took the medication himself. He had multiple substances in his system. I think he made a cocktail of the drugs that he had with him and had a bad reaction to it and caused his death.
At trial, Jade was supported by family and friends, including her biological father, Steve Janks, and her longtime friend, Heather Pierce.
Tom was a mess, an absolute mess for a long time. There's no way that she had like a plan and first degree and all of that. I was like, there's no way, because that's not Jade.
Prosecutors Jorge Del Portillo and Teresa Pham were worried the jury might feel that Jade herself was the victim.
She's a sympathetic defendant.
She is.
I mean, she found naked photos of herself on her stepdad's computer.
Call Jade Janks.
Jade takes the stand to tell the jury what happened in her own words.
My name's Jade Janks.
Jade says that ever since she met Tom when she was a teenager, they maintained a strong bond.
It's hard to come by somebody you just feel that you can trust completely, and I did feel that way. I referred to him as my father, and he could call me his daughter, and then...
Which is why, Jade tells the jury, it was so devastating to find those photos on December 23rd while Tom was in the hospital and she was cleaning his apartment.
I bumped the mouse on his desktop computer, and it shook the screen awake. And I looked, and there's a picture of female breasts on the screen. And I look, and I thought, those are my breasts. I couldn't believe it. I was in complete shock.
Jade describes finding even more on Tom's computer after that.
There was a rolling screen, like a slideshow of pictures of me that I've taken over the years.
What type of pictures were they?
They were naked photos.
Did you ever give naked photos to your stepfather?
No.
Did you ever show him naked photos of yourself?
No.
How did he get these photos?
Jade doesn't know.
These were photos that Jade had taken of herself.
Jade and various boyfriends. Have you ever made any sexual overtures toward your stepfather?
No.
Did you tell him that you had nude photos of yourself?
No.
And you never showed him anything similar to those, correct?
No, he was my dad.
Tom was still in the hospital, but Jade says she didn't feel safe.
And you were afraid that he was going to come back and find out that you had found the photos. Yes?
Yes.
And you were worried about how he might react toward you.
Yes.
Right? And he lived next door to you.
Yes.
And that's why Jade says she got in touch with Alan Roach, who worked in security, the day she found those photos.
So why did you think that you needed somebody like Alan Roach?
I was scared. I mean, when I first saw the photos, I couldn't even use the bathroom. I just felt so disgusting. I couldn't shower either. I was scared. I was scared of being, nude and vulnerable. And I wanted somebody to just look out for me and make sure that, I was safe.
Over the next few days, Tom was moved from the hospital to a rehab center, and Jade felt she had to act.
I can't continue just living next door to him and not feeling safe or feeling like this. I mean, I have to do something.
When you say I needed to do something, I mean, did you need to kill him?
No, I wanted Tom to just go away and leave me alone.
According to Jade, Alan was planning to come over after she brought Tom home to help her confront him.
I wanted Alan to basically, explain to him this is not okay, or I could explain it, but Alan just be there just in case.
Your plan was to...
Jade says that on December 31st, in spite of her feelings, she was doing everything she could to help Tom, who she says seemed preoccupied with finding medication.
He started calling at about 6:45 in the morning, and he's asking me to get him codeine, which I don't really understand. He says that he hasn't effing slept and he wants to rest.
Jade took Tom out of the rehab at a little after 11 a.m. He had a bag of medication with him, including Ambien. And remember, the autopsy says Ambien is what killed him. Jade says almost as soon as Tom got into her car, he also helped himself to her prescription medicines.
He kept saying, like, did you get me any painkillers? Like, is this it? Oh, here. And then he just kind of took it.
Jade says Tom seemed fine when she stopped at this shopping plaza and texted Alan Roach to come meet her. She went into a couple of stores while she waited to hear back.
I was just getting started on a house project, so I just went to go get supplies and kind of shop around.
Jade bought gloves, towels, and a nylon cord, and some spray paint. She says these items were for a painting project.
Typically, I lay plastic down and kind of enclose it so that I'm not getting paint on all the foliage.
Jade still hadn't heard back from Alan and took Tom home. She says Tom was now too groggy to walk on his own, and she couldn't get him out of her car.
I parked in the parking lot.
She says she was worried about him and drove him back to the rehab for help.
I just explained, my dad's just been released and something's wrong. You need to bring him back. They wouldn't let me inside, though. They're pretty adamant with COVID. I couldn't go inside.
Jade returned home with Tom, but says she was still not able to get him out of her car. Alan had finally texted back to say he couldn't make it over after all, but sent his friend, a man named Brian Solomon, to help her get Tom inside.
Had you ever met Brian Solomon before?
No.
Jade says Brian wouldn't help her with Tom and left right away. So Jade reached out to her friend Adam Siplak and asked him to come over. Adam arrived later that evening.
I had just said, I was just in tears. I had said that, I want to get him into my house, or into his house.
Jade says Adam quickly got upset and left without helping her. And this is where Jade's story doesn't line up with Adam's. Remember, Adam was the person who called police on New Year's Day.
She said that she had possibly killed her stepdad.
Jade says she didn't confess to anything. She says Adam was distressed by how sick Tom looked, and that's why he wouldn't help her. After he left, Jade says she didn't know what else to do and tried to get Tom situated in her car for the night so he could sleep off whatever he had taken.
I made sure he's comfortable. He had pillows, and I'm trying to remember. Yeah, he had a blanket.
The next morning, in the cold light of New Year's Day, Jade says Tom was still in her car when she realized the worst had happened.
Did you touch Mr. Merriman?
Yes.
What did you feel?
I tried to pull his leg, and his pajama pant lifted, and his leg was cold.
Ms. Janks, did you think Tom Merriman was dead at that point?
I knew he was.
How do you think Tom died? Chat now on Facebook and X.
After Jade told the jury how she found Tom's body, her own attorney challenged her.
Did you think about calling 911?
I was scared too.
Why were you scared?
I didn't want to get blamed. I was the one that picked him up, And I didn't want to get blamed for killing him.
And she tried to explain what she did with his body.
I continued to follow out. I still wanted to get him into his house. I mean, I didn't know what else to do. I panicked, so I put the blanket over him. I got empty boxes and just kind of stacked it, made it look like just like a pile of debris.
Jade may have left Tom's body in the driveway, but she says she never meant him harm.
I mean, did you want your stepfather dead? Janks, did you grab him with your own two hands and did you strangle him?
No.
Would you ever done that to Tom ever?
I would do that to anyone.
And then the prosecutors told their version of the story.
We lied to the police about where Tom was.
I didn't. I just asked for an attorney, and I kept asking for one.
You didn't want the police to know that Tom died in your car.
I wasn't trying to hide it, but I didn't want to go alone and tell them that.
Prosecutors said Jade was lying to cover up her plan.
The plan was to drug him, suffocate him, and stage it to look like an overdose.
Del Portillo says after she picked Tom up from the rehab, Jade used his own prescription sleeping pills to knock him out. And he says he has proof Jade's DNA is on those packs of pills.
The package of Zolpidem, which is the Ambien sleeping pills, that had the defendant's DNA on it, but not Tom's. And I think it's important that the jury heard that it was Jade Janks' DNA on that Zolpidem pack.
And according to prosecutors, there's much more evidence, too. Jade, they say, left a real-time trail of clues that day. Remember her cell phone, the one they called a gold mine? Turns out it was packed with texts, messages that they say outlined her plan to kill.
We're talking 11, 12 minutes after being discharged, she sends a text message to Alan, the fixer, saying, I just dosed the hell out of him.
When someone says, I dosed the hell out of him, you would agree with me that that means someone gave another person a whole lot of drugs, right?
I guess it's a poor phrasing.
Del Portillo thinks Jade's explanation is nonsense. He says first she drugged Tom, and then she needed to stall for a bit. And her texts even say that. Stopping at Dixieland to stall.
So she was stalling for the drugs to really kick in and make him asleep and unaware of what she was about to do. She's stalling to see if this guy, Alan Roach, can come by and help her commit the murder.
And remember those supplies Jade said she'd picked up for a painting project? According to the prosecutors, they were actually Jade's murder kit.
She goes to the store and buys this murder kit. Zip ties, gloves, rope, and towels.
Prosecutors say up to that point, Jade's plan was on track. But by a little after noon, things started to go wrong.
You could see from the text messages that she was in a panic.
She writes, he's waking up. Jade's texting her so-called fixer, Alan Roach. And she adds, can you come over? But the fixer is not responding.
This plot was a total mess, and it fell apart right away.
Finally, the fixer texts her back. He says he can't come, but he's sending someone he knows, that guy named Brian Solomon.
Okay, so the plan is Brian will bring Tom into the house.
Yep.
Brian Solomon later told us that when he went over to help Jade, that she told him something that he'll never forget. I want you to bring him inside, strangle him, and I'll take care of the rest.
Brian Solomon quickly left the house without doing anything. And soon, Jade is back texting the missing fixer again.
At 3 p.m., you texted Alan, he's waking up, and I'm not sure how much longer I can control my temper. Is that right?
Yes, but that's to Alan.
You texted Alan, he's waking up and getting way more aggressive, so it's way more real. True?
True. I think, again, I was just panicking and trying to urge Alan to come over.
You would agree with me that this looks very suspicious, this text message.
Oh, yeah.
Jade texts Alan again. I can't keep a kicking body in my truck.
Now that we know Tom was found dead in his driveway under a pile of trash that you put together, that this text message looks very suspicious. You'd agree with me, right?
I mean, yes.
It's now around 4 p.m. Alan has disappeared.
At 4:08 p.m., you texted Alan, he's up, I guess I'm on my own. True?
True.
How do you think she killed Tom?
We believe that the evidence shows that she put a bag over his head. When the bag's not working fast enough, she has to strangle him, and she has no other choice. It's too late to back out now.
Investigators even found a plastic bag in Jade's car. It had her DNA on the outside and Tom's on the inside. But there's a huge problem with the prosecution's case, and that's the autopsy. The autopsy never said Tom was strangled. There weren't any marks on his neck. So what happened? How could Jade possibly have strangled him to death?
That presented a big difficulty for us strategically of going forward in trial.
Right, so you have this supposed confession of her saying she strangled him, but no evidence of strangulation.
Right.
Turns out the prosecutors had an answer for that. They say it's totally possible to strangle someone to death without leaving marks if the victim is already knocked out.
I think that is part of the plan, is to dose him just enough to where he's incapacitated. So if you're unconscious, your breathing is already depressed. When someone is already unconscious, it does not require that much pressure and would not leave bruising. It would not leave breakage of the cartilage that's inside the throat. It would not leave physical evidence.
It only takes 4 pounds of pressure to kill, to cut off the blood supply to your head. And when you and I shook hands earlier today, that was about 11 pounds of pressure. So it's less than a handshake to kill.
After she murdered Tom, prosecutors say she left his body in her car overnight, and the next morning, Jade had to do something about it.
In a story full of strange twists, this may be the oddest. Prosecutors say Tom's body was still in Jade's car, and she wanted to make his death look like an accident, like he'd overdosed on his own medicine. But she couldn't get his 180-pound body out of her car and into his apartment, and no one would help her. So, they say, she drove to a hospital with Tom dead in the back of her car, picked up a wheelchair, put it in her car, and drove back to Tom's place.
How'd you get the wheelchair in your car if Tom was still in there?
It's big. The trunk was up. Tom was kind of, his legs were akimbo when he was laying down. And I kind of hoisted it up into the back window of the 4Runner can roll down.
When you were doing this, at this point, did you know Tom was dead?
I did, but I didn't want to know it yet.
So you suspected Tom was dead, and you're at Scripps Hospital, and you don't tell anyone at the hospital that Tom might need some help.
Correct.
And there was just one more thing. On the day the cops came by looking for Tom, they didn't know anything yet, just that Tom might be missing. Jade jumped into her car.
4:30, when she was pulling out of her driveway, when they were getting ready to do the welfare check, she was pulling out of her driveway and she was getting detained after being pulled over. The very last text message on her cell phone was to Alan Roach saying, "Lose my number."
What does that say to you?
Get rid of the evidence.
What do you make of Jade's text messages? See more evidence from the case at 48hours.com.
That was the biggest hurdle in our case, we feel, was the jury might dislike Tom Merriman so much that they would vote to either acquit or reduce the murder to something else.
As Jade's trial is drawing to a close, prosecutor Jorge Del Portillo wants to make sure the jury's attention is on what Jade Janks has done and not on Tom.
Tom was not on trial. This wasn't his trial. He didn't get a trial. She was his judge, jury, and executioner. And so it all comes back to Jade.
Mr. Carlos, you wish to make a closing argument?
In his closing argument to the jury, Mark Carlos emphasizes what he says are the weaknesses of the prosecution's case.
What type of evidence do we have? We have a lot of speculation. It's speculation upon speculation upon speculation.
He argues Adam Siplak's story that Jade confessed is a lie.
Mr. Siplak, no credibility. He wants to get out of something that he thinks might have happened.
And he says Brian Solomon, who also claimed Jade confessed to him that day, can't be telling the truth.
He claims that immediately, and this was his testimony, immediately upon entering, she says, he's in the car, go strangle him. This is somebody that Janks had never met before.
Neither Adam Siplak, Brian Solomon, nor Alan Roach was charged with any crime in this case. And Mark Carlos urges the jury to stick to what he calls the truth.
And the truth is, they have zero evidence to support a murder.
Her DNA was on the blister pack.
But Jorge Del Portillo gets to make the last argument the jury will hear.
It starts with, I just dosed the hell out of him. The plan is starting. And with Alan, it ends with, lose my number, I'm getting pulled over. And buried in between all of those text messages is a murder plot. Find her guilty of murder. Because the evidence proves it, the law requires it, and justice demands it.
The jury went out that afternoon and was back the next morning to continue their deliberations.
Jury comes in at 9 a.m. We get the call at 9:30 a.m. We have a verdict. We were shocked.
We were a little bit nervous.
The quickest verdict I've ever had was 15 minutes, and it was a not guilty. So I don't put a lot of stock in quick verdicts.
Tom's business partner, Pat Flanagan, got a text about it.
I was very anxious. My hands were sweating. I was nervous.
We have, Your Honor. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Jade Sasha Janks, guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section
Guilty of first-degree murder.
Subsection A, a felony, as charged.
Jade appears stunned.
Juror number 1.
Yes.
Number 2.
Yes.
Number 3.
Yes.
Number 4.
Yes.
Number 5.
Yes.
Number 6.
Yes.
Number 7.
Yes.
Number 8.
Yes.
It was a huge relief. It was an absolute relief.
And when you heard that word, guilty?
It felt right.
Guilty of the crime.
Pat Flanagan says he saw Jade's reaction to the verdict later, online.
I still go back and watch that sometimes.
Why?
Because I feel bad for Tom. He died buried in trash. Now she gets to feel a little of that pain that we've all been feeling for years.
But there's still the matter of those photos.
Jade said that she found nude photos of herself on Tom's computer. Do you believe that?
I can't disprove it. I find it, I don't want to believe it.
It's interesting you say you don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
Tom's hard drive was not recovered after his body was found, but prosecutors, who spent 2 years investigating this case, believe Jade is telling the truth, at least about this.
Did you have any doubt that these photos actually existed?
We talked about that, but we had no doubt. We found that photo on Tom's laptop showing that it had been used as a wallpaper, showing that it had been on his laptop since August of 2019. So we had no doubt that these photos existed.
In March of 2023, 3 months after she was convicted of Tom's murder, Jade was in court for her sentencing and listened as a local pastor shared his memories of Tom and the butterfly farm.
I still remember Tom and wish I could drop by for a smile, to ask a question about plants or butterflies, or just to recharge those batteries that keep seeming to wear down as I get older. I believe my life is richer because I knew Tom.
Jade Janks.
Jade's biological father, who had not spoken publicly since she was charged, put the focus back on Tom's betrayal.
Firstly, I can only imagine what she went through when she found out that Tom, her stepfather, a person she trusted, that she called Dad, was a sick, perverted individual. All I can say is this fight is not over. I truly believe that an injustice has taken place.
Jade Janks spoke that day, too.
Tom came into my life when I was just a little girl and exerted influence during that early stage of development when I was still figuring things out. Unfortunately, that influence manifested itself into appropriate touch, coercion, reckless behavior, and complete violation of what I now realize is years of psychological manipulation. All of this came crashing down on me when I found hundreds of naked photos of myself in his computer and felt shattered.
Jade did not tell this story during trial, and we can't verify it. Jade still insists she didn't kill Tom and only admits to covering up his dead body.
I'm still picking up the pieces, and it's my sincere hope that over the next few years, I can put the pieces back and heal from this trauma. I'm sorry I didn't act the way I was supposed to that day. I think about it every day since.
She will be committed to the Department of Corrections.
The judge sentenced Jade to serve 25 years to life. And as the prosecution looks back on a difficult and emotional case, they say it could have easily turned out very differently.
She could have gotten away with murder had she carried out her plan and the police did a welfare check and found Tom laying in his bed. She would have got away with murder.
CBS next Saturday. 48 Hours brings you back-to-back episodes all summer long. Next week, murder off campus.
There's evidence that a missing college student is a victim of foul play.
The killer took 4 lives in a matter of minutes.
48 Hours crime time double feature next Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
They call it the Taj Mahal. It's picturesque, it's beautiful, until you have to come here for a murder trial.
Case 2011, CR 3314, People versus Daniel DeWild.
The last time I was in this room was to make a determination whether Daniel DeWild was guilty of murder.
From the very beginning, it was clear that it was a confusing case. It was old, and that this was a murder case involving identical twins, Dan and David DeWild.
The prosecution's theory was that the two brothers conspired together to kill Daniel's wife, Heather, and kept it a secret from pretty much everybody.
It was a case that went cold in 2003. My name is Robert Weiner, Chief Deputy District Attorney, Jefferson County, Colorado, lead prosecutor on the DeWild homicide. July 24th of 2003, Heather DeWild was going over to her estranged husband's house. Heather had 2 young children, Hannah and Jacob, and she would do anything for her kids. She was supposed to sign a check. She also went over to pick up a set of insurance cards for her children. The check was never endorsed. The cards were never picked up.
She apparently arrived at the house, and then after that, she was never seen or heard from again. So there's no evidence that she ever left the house.
You don't have any kind of murder weapon.
Correct.
You don't have any kind of fingerprints from any suspects.
Correct.
You don't have any of Heather's blood in the house where you believe she was murdered?
Correct. There was no proverbial smoking gun to tie Daniel to Heather's murder.
During testimony, we had learned that they were watching crime shows, such like CSI and other forensic shows to figure out how to get away with murder.
We got nothing. Nobody cleans a car this good. There is no evidence.
Daniel and David would watch those shows and formulate their plan, and they certainly did not leave any forensic evidence.
12 of us come in here. we're getting along just fine.
Then once we had to dig into the evidence, things changed dramatically. Because the nature of the case was so circumstantial and there wasn't any real hard physical evidence, you spend your time trying to piece it together.
And we went backwards, we went forward, and then we started putting it up on the walls, surrounding ourselves with it.
I had no idea how the deliberations were going.
It was really difficult. People were emotional. People were getting on one another's nerves.
There's a lot of pacing. There's a lot of just nervous anxiety.
There was some crying, there was some yelling that went on.
You start thinking, okay, what are they thinking about? What are they hung up on? Why are they taking so long?
We took a poll, 6 and 6, and where do we go from there?
This is basically the route I took in the evening to come over here to look for her.
Dave Springer is driving the same route he did on July 24, 2003.
And I was looking between the houses.
But on that day, the retired Denver cop was in a frantic search for his own daughter. When you were just driving around, what were you hoping you'd see?
Maybe I would see my daughter's car move and see her somewhere.
30-year-old Heather DeWild thought she'd be safe going to her soon-to-be ex-husband's house in Edgewater, Colorado, if she took along her 2 children, Jacob and Hannah. She planned to just stop by to take care of the insurance cards and the check.
I told her not to go there, and I didn't think she would, but she did.
And then she vanished. As you're driving around, you have a sinking feeling?
Yeah, I really had a bad feeling about it.
Dave Springer says he had been worried what his son-in-law, Dan DeWild, might do as the final divorce approached.
He wanted to keep things under control, his control, and that was slipping away from him, and I think he was getting more and more desperate and more hostile.
So when Heather didn't return after going to Dan's house, her anxious mother, Carol Springer, thought the worst and called him.
He told me that she went shopping. I says, well, that's not true. That's what I told him. I says, no, that's not true.
We knew immediately that was a lie.
Why?
Because before she left the house, she didn't take any money with her or a credit card.
And he said she went shopping?
Right.
How much sense did that make to you?
Well, it didn't make any sense.
And Heather would never leave her children behind, even with their dad, says her sister, Rebecca Barger.
There's no way she would leave without her kids. No way. I just instantly knew he did something to her.
You were sure it was Dan?
Mm-hmm.
Heather's mother rushed over to Dan's house to pick up her grandchildren. And what was going through your mind at that point?
Let me get the kids and be gone. I wanted to get out of there.
The kids, only 3 and 5 years old, couldn't say where their mother had gone. Local police stopped at Dan's house and looked around, but didn't find anything suspicious. But Heather's father, the veteran cop, was convinced something terrible had happened.
Dave was obviously extremely concerned.
The next morning, Mark Kreider, a detective with the Denver PD, was pulled in to assist the Edgewater police. Heather was now officially a missing person.
It was a little unusual because it was a Denver police officer's daughter who was missing. And that does personalize it a little bit more.
Kreider learned that after a rocky 6-year marriage, Heather and Dan DeWild were just days from finalizing their divorce.
I had learned that the divorce was getting a little nasty.
And that Dan was upset when Heather was awarded temporary custody of Jacob and Hannah, and he was ordered to pay child support.
He was very angry over that because he thought he was going to lose his home. He couldn't pay all his bills.
That's when twin brother David came to the rescue by moving in along with his girlfriend Roseanne to help Dan pay the bills. Born a minute and a half apart, Dan and David were inseparable, even working as mechanics for the Transit Authority. So the first stop for Kreider was the DeWild's house. Heather's husband, Dan, answered the door.
Quickly into our conversation, he had mentioned that he had had an attorney, which I thought was a little odd, and his attorney told him that he shouldn't talk to the police. What lights in my mind is, well, why do you have an attorney? This is a missing person. We're trying to help find your wife.
And when David DeWild pulled into the driveway, Dan made sure his twin brother didn't talk to the police either.
Dan walks over as if to physically grab his brother, and as he's walking over, he's yelling for him not to talk. He doesn't have to talk to get inside. I'm thinking now we don't have a missing person, we have a murder.
But without the DeWild's cooperation, Kreider couldn't search their house. By the time police got a warrant, Heather had been missing for 6 days. Was there any sign of a murder weapon in the house?
No, there was not.
Any blood?
No, there was not.
Any sign that Heather had been in there or been killed in there?
No, there was no sign of that at all.
But investigators soon learned that David was taking his Suburban 15 miles away to be repaired.
Why? He's a mechanic, his brother's a mechanic. Did it pique my interest? Absolutely.
Investigators wanted to check out the vehicle. What were you looking for?
Some form of decomposing human scent. In other words, had there been a body in there?
Deputy Sheriff Al Nelson and his dogs searched the Suburban.
They hit on the rear and I believe it would be the driver's side rear door area.
And that's the first hint that maybe Heather's body had been in there.
Something had been in there, right?
Kreider's next step was to confront David DeWild.
We said, hey, there's a decomposing body in your vehicle. And he talked around things, and at one point we put it to him directly and said, did you kill Heather? His head's kind of down, he's a little emotional. He says he needs to talk to an attorney, and he walked into his house.
Kreider now believed that both brothers had killed Heather, and what convinced him even more was when 1 day later, David suddenly married his longtime girlfriend, Roseanne. Suddenly, you know, Dave says to you, let's get married. Doesn't that seem strange?
At the time, it didn't, really, it didn't, because I'd been hounding him, and then Heather went missing, and it wasn't a happy time, so, you know, we didn't do that. And so I griped a lot, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's like, well, let's go get married then. So it didn't seem strange at all to me.
It never occurred to you he might be thinking, well, she won't be able to talk to the cops, she won't be able to testify against me if I marry her?
No, I don't know the law.
We're looking at the rear of a white four-door Nissan Sentra.
2 weeks after Heather disappeared, her car was found in this apartment complex, just 5 miles from the DeWild home. But no Heather.
Inside the rear back seat, there are 2 baby car seats.
Crime Lab investigators searched the Nissan, but found nothing helpful.
Each and every hour it's out in the environment, in the elements, we lose a little bit more evidence.
When the car was found, did that make things worse?
Yeah, worse, yeah. That was a major breakdown for me right there.
Why?
You knew at that point for sure she was gone.
1 month later, Curtis Johnson was moving dirt on this canyon road.
This is identical to what I was doing that day.
When he uncovered Heather's body.
Basically, the body would have been On that side right there is where the body would have been sitting.
Heather had been wrapped in trash bags. There was tape on her face. Her hands and neck were bound with rope. Her death was ruled a homicide, but her body was so decomposed, the cause of death was undetermined. And investigators still didn't have enough evidence to arrest either of the brothers. And let's be honest, Detective, it really does look like they're gonna get away with this.
Oh, absolutely.
The police were saying that they were doing what they could and they were looking into it. After a while, you just think, is anything ever gonna happen?
The Springer family couldn't understand why the police were dragging their feet in arresting the primary suspect in Heather's death, her husband, Dan DeWild. Here you are, a member of the Denver Police Department. How much were you allowed to know about the investigation into
Absolutely nothing. At times I would think, well, they're really not doing anything. They're just telling me they're doing something and they're just letting it slide.
You do start to lose hope, but you try to stay in there. I did.
Their prayers were answered in 2005, nearly 2 years after Heather's murder, when Scott Story became Jefferson County's new district attorney.
They just poured their hearts out about how frustrated they were, how they yearned for justice for Heather.
Story promised to reopen the investigation. When you made that promise, did you realize what you were getting yourself into? Did you have any idea?
Not entirely.
He assembled a task force and put investigator Russ Boatwright in charge. What was it that drove all of you, to try to get this case solved?
Just at first blush, I think you knew what the case was. And it seemed solvable. It seemed like it was right there at your fingertips.
But after combing through 1,500 pages of reports and retesting all the forensic evidence,
I don't even know how many times we went back through things and double-checked things. And we had no DNA. We really had no physical evidence.
not that DNA would have helped. Remember, Dan and Dave are identical twins.
They could have the same DNA.
So if we had have found, one of the DeWild's hairs in that car, that was not going to be the smoking gun piece of evidence.
Along with the brothers, the prosecution team was also convinced that Roseanne, who was living in the house, had to be involved.
We really believed that she had to know what went on. She couldn't just be in that house. She just couldn't be totally ignorant of what happened.
There was that suspiciously timed marriage to David.
It was the day after David is confronted on the front porch and told that the cadaver dog hit on his Suburban.
And what Russ Boatwright says Roseanne told others was the real reason they tied the knot.
She had made the statement she had to marry him so she couldn't testify against him. And I don't know what else that means other than what it sounds like it means.
I mean, it sounds incriminating.
Yes.
Incriminating or not, investigators still didn't have enough evidence to arrest any of the DeWilds. And as the years passed, David Springer's frustration grew. How angry were you?
Very angry. I would be screaming angry at times.
After pleadings from the family, in 2009, 6 years after Heather was murdered, Russ Boatwright was assigned to the case full-time.
And that really was the turning point.
The file would grow to 30,000 pages, filling more than 15 boxes, as Boatwright and his team methodically built a circumstantial case, piece by piece. But clearly, the killer or killers had been careful. How would you describe how this car was found?
It was clean at the time.
Heather's car was so clean, there was no evidence that she had ever been in it.
We didn't find any evidence of Heather's DNA being present inside or outside the vehicle, nor did we find any fingerprints or anything else to indicate that Heather used that vehicle.
What he did have was this.
This DVD is a copy of a videotape that we recovered from the residence.
A sex tape that Dan and Heather made years earlier, showing Dan's fascination with bondage and ropes.
What we end up seeing in this videotape are images of Daniel tying Heather up in a very similar manner to how she was found.
And this discovery.
What we have here is Daniel's dating profile from an online dating service. He described himself as a widower.
The trouble is, Heather's body had not been found yet.
What did that say?
Well, that said, he probably knew he was a widower at that point.
While the pieces of the puzzle clearly pointed at the DeWilds, prosecutor Robert Weiner still couldn't answer some important questions.
We didn't know how she died, and the autopsy report didn't say how she died.
You don't even know where she died.
No.
You don't know exactly who killed her.
We didn't.
But when Weiner took what evidence he had to a grand jury, he got an indictment. And so on December 14th, 2011, more than 8 years after Heather's body was found on that canyon road, Dan, David, and Roseanne DeWild were finally arrested for her murder.
You still have a pretty weak case.
Yeah.
I mean, you have enough to indict these three, but now you gotta prove these three.
Right. And that was kind of my thought is now the work begins.
Dan's attorneys, Tom Ward and Fran Simonette, were feeling very confident as they prepared for trial.
Was there any physical evidence that tied Dan to the death of his wife?
Not a shred. None.
Until they were hit with a bombshell.
And how did that change the case for the two of you?
It completely flipped it upside down.
As prosecutors prepared for trial, District Attorney Scott Story worried about their purely circumstantial case.
In today's world, with like the CSI shows and those kinds of shows, jurors want more than just circumstantial evidence.
Their best hope? To somehow get one of the DeWilds to turn on the others. Investigators say it was just a matter of finding the weakest link.
Did you think Roseanne was going to turn against her husband and her brother-in-law?
I thought there was a possibility Roseanne would.
And did she?
No.
Instead, in a stunning turn of events, it was Roseanne's husband, David, who suddenly broke down. 9 years after Heather was killed, David DeWild admitted that he hid her body after his twin brother, Dan, killed her.
I just fell to pieces.
Roseanne claims that until that moment, she never guessed the two brothers were involved in Heather's death.
It's hard to explain my feeling, denial. No, it's not true, but it was true.
With David finally ready to talk, it fell to Russ Boatwright to uncover all the details. According to David, Dan began planning Heather's death in April of 2003 after he was ordered to pay child support.
And that's when I started to realize that this was actually a well-thought-out plan.
But why would David go through with this and help his brother?
I think David describes it as, I'm trying to talk him out of it most of the time, but he said when Daniel told him, look, I'm doing this with you or without you, he said at that point he made a decision to help his brother. He said he knew if his brother did this on his own, he would get caught. I'm Investigator Boatwright. Today's date is August 4th, 2012. Present is David DeWild. He's going to walk through what occurred during the time that Heather was murdered.
A clean-shaven David DeWild agreed to take investigators back to the scene of the crime, the DeWild's garage. to show exactly where and how Heather was killed.
You could tell it impacted him. You could tell he was upset going back in there again.
It started at the beginning with where you talked
A warning. Some of what David is about to tell is disturbing to hear.
We're going to jump ahead to the point where you're waiting for Heather's arrival. Okay. Okay.
According to the plan, Heather and the kids arrived at noon on July 24, 2003. As Dan went to meet them, David says he tried to stop his brother.
And I stop him right when he's walking up, and I'm in his way, and I say, Dan, don't do this. But he was very calm.
As the children played in the house, Heather followed her husband Dan into the garage. Prosecutor Robert Weiner believes Dan lured her there with a promise to return the sex tape the couple had made.
He knew he had to use something to get her into that garage, and that was that tape, because she wanted that tape back.
The door opens, Heather walks through, and she says, "What did you want to show me out here?" And my brother walks through, closes the door, grabs her by like both shoulders, throws her down hard, and it just hit her like Pearl Harbor. She didn't know that was gonna happen. And then she goes to get up like this, and she looks at me, and I look at her.
At that moment, David could have stopped Heather's murder, but he didn't.
She knew something was going to happen, was just about to happen, and kind of looked to him to say, you know, help me here. And he said, I didn't do anything. I didn't do a thing to help her.
And he takes a mallet off the counter, and she's trying to get back up. Whacks her. She drops. He tosses a hammer down. He takes his noose, puts it around her neck.
Dan then hanged Heather from the rafters.
I guess cinches it up. Comes over and pulls on the rope.
My jaw dropped. Are you kidding me? At that point, he began to stage her body by tying her and making it look like it was a bonded sex act gone bad. Daniel proceeds to place her body in trash bags.
As Heather's children continue to play elsewhere in the house, David abandoned Heather's car at the apartment complex parking lot. By the time David returned, Dan had already placed his wife's body in the back of the Suburban.
In there, and I just make sure she's not breathing or anything, you know, I put my hand on her. This is what I remember.
Okay.
As David tells it, the brothers were bound by their terrible secret, and he revealed how he and Dan managed to erase all evidence of Heather's brutal murder.
They were watching crime shows, the CSI type shows, any crime shows that they could watch and learn. So they double gloved. They had 2 sets of gloves on because they didn't want to leave any trace evidence. They didn't want to leave blood.
I'd say it was a single strike to the head.
Explains the lack of spatter at the scene. First hit's free. Killer knew what he was doing.
And Heather's body might never have been found if David had made it to a pre-planned burial site. Instead, transmission problems with his Suburban forced him to hide her along that canyon road, where Curtis Johnson discovered her. The prosecution believed they finally knew how Heather had been killed. But could they trust David?
I mean, David's lied for 9 years.
He's a liar.
He is a liar, and he's certainly capable of lying.
So before they gave him a deal, David had to pass a polygraph.
How did he do?
He passed on the issues as far as killing Heather.
But were there some areas that he failed or that were inconsistent?
He had some issues on some other questions, primarily the involvement of others.
On the issue of Roseanne?
Yes.
But Roseanne will not go on trial after all. Although prosecutors maintain she was not part of any deal, after spending more than 8 months in jail, all charges against her were dismissed for lack of evidence.
Do you have any regret about putting her in jail for 8 months?
Oh, no. I was very confident that after the fact that she had some knowledge and that very likely she had some participation of one degree or another. We just couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
It's hard to believe that a woman who was in the house when Heather was killed and was married to one of the killers would know nothing, see nothing. But that's exactly what Roseanne says.
Roseanne, did you have anything to do with Heather's death and her disappearance?
I did not. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know anything.
You think there's still some people who think you do?
I'm sure.
As they head to trial, the prosecution is counting on David to convict his twin brother.
I mean, it's kind of like dancing with the devil.
In this situation, we, I guess, had agreed to make a deal with the devil's twin.
Nine and a half years after Heather DeWild was murdered, her husband Dan finally goes on trial at the Jefferson County Courthouse. Defense attorney Tom Ward.
There was a kind of tension in the air that I've never felt in a courtroom before.
There are no cameras allowed, but the courtroom is packed.
I was worried. I didn't know what I was going to find out.
The state's most important witness, David DeWild, is about to testify against his identical twin brother. Without forensic evidence, the whole case rides on David.
I watched him come in, and I was holding my fingers and crossing my toes. And
Prosecutor Robert Weiner.
You saw him look at his brother?
Yeah.
And you're wondering, oh my gosh, will he lose his nerve?
That's exactly what I was thinking. And then I asked him who killed Heather.
And what did David say?
He pointed to his brother.
David tells the court that it was his twin brother who killed his wife in the garage and that he just went along with it. But Dan's defense attorney claims his client is completely innocent, that Dan never knew where Heather went after she left his house on July 24, 2003.
She didn't say exactly where she was going. He expected her back in a couple of hours, and she never came back, and he didn't know what happened to her. The story Dan told was always consistent. It never changed.
In fact, Dan's defense is that it's David who killed Heather. Just look at David's actions that day.
David, by his own admission, is responsible for getting rid of the car. He's responsible for getting rid of the body. All of those things are very hard to believe that someone would do if they weren't the perpetrator.
But why would David kill his brother's wife?
David DeWild says that he always felt that Heather was attracted to him, that there was a possibility that after Dan and Heather's divorce was final, that he and Heather would be able to get together. There's no other evidence of any of this besides what David DeWild says about it, so I question whether he had some sort of an obsession with Heather.
And he killed her because she wouldn't respond to him.
It's possible.
But prosecutor Weiner says that's absurd.
I don't think there's any way David could have done it by himself. And looking at the dynamics, it became pretty clear that David was set up by Daniel. Daniel is the controlling one. David wasn't going to lose his house. Daniel was losing his house. David had absolutely no motive, none whatsoever, to kill Heather.
What's more, says Weiner, why would a man who got away with a murder for almost a decade suddenly tell investigators a story where he implicates himself?
He throws himself under the bus more than anybody else does. He could have very easily fashioned a story that made this look like an accident.
But defense attorney Tom Ward claims David turned against his brother Dan because he got a great plea deal. Instead of life, he got just 12 years.
He was able to give a statement that completely pinned the entire murder on his brother Dan, and at the same time completely exonerated his wife Roseanne, whose case was dismissed.
What's more, Ward says, it's David who has a history of violence. He was married once before and attacked his wife.
David at one point tried to choke his wife and had his hands around her neck until she passed out and said, "Next time I'll kill you, bitch."
The jury won't hear the most shocking claim David makes against his twin brother. He says that Dan proposed teaming up to kill each other's ex-wives. That in Dan's mind, committing murder beats paying child support.
I was shocked when David told me that. I thought, you have got to be kidding me. Apparently Daniel, according to David, had worked the whole thing out in his head.
The judge rules that information is just too prejudicial. Instead, it's left to Prosecutor Weiner in his closing to remind the jury which twin he's convinced was pulling the strings.
Dan DeWilde is a cool, calculated killer.
On Friday, November 16, 2012, after a 2-week trial, the case goes to the jury.
One of the first things we did was take kind of a straw poll. There were 6 people who voted that they weren't sure and 6 people who thought straight away he was guilty.
As time goes, I'm getting more and more nervous.
Are you worried that the jury is just going to not know who actually killed Heather?
Yes, that occurred to me in the courtroom, that it's going to be a problem, and it was.
On the second day of deliberations, the vote is now 10 guilty, 2 not sure.
The 2 jurors came back and they were completely shut down. They said, "We don't think that there's enough evidence."
The holdouts wouldn't talk to us, but the others say it all comes down to David DeWilde's credibility. Did he downplay his own involvement in Heather's murder to get a plea deal and get his wife Roseanne out of prison?
They felt that David had too much to gain, so David could have done it. And I think the point that the other 10 of us had arrived at was it didn't matter at that point in time because they were both involved.
I think they must have felt like they needed to know exactly what happened, and they had to have a piece of direct evidence of that happening.
Yeah.
And the rest of us didn't.
It wasn't their job to connect the dots.
The prosecutors had to do it for them.
I was incredibly frustrated because I had committed to think for myself, and I felt that they didn't do their duty.
The jurors are able to agree on 2 lesser charges. They all believe that Dan DeWilde planned to kill his wife and that he helped cover up the crime. But they're hopelessly deadlocked on whether Dan is the twin who murdered Heather. Darren, how heated did it get?
I walked out and I said, if you guys are truly done, then we need to go back and tell them that we're done.
How did you all feel when you went into the courtroom?
I was angry.
Discouraged.
Dan DeWilde is convicted only of conspiracy and accessory to murder. Jurors failed to convict him of first-degree murder.
What was your reaction?
We're doing it again.
Oh, right away.
Oh, absolutely.
What were you feeling?
Pretty disappointed.
Yeah.
He was convicted on 2 counts. He's going to prison for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he'll get out, and that's the problem.
You want him to go away for life.
Right. We've been fighting this long, we'll keep fighting.
The plan is to retry Dan DeWilde on first-degree murder. But just 1 month later, fearful of ending up in prison with no chance of parole, Dan takes a deal and pleads guilty to second-degree murder. On February 28, 2013, Dan DeWilde is back in Judge Christopher Munch's courtroom.
Let's call Keepa versus Daniel DeWilde.
This time, cameras are allowed.
Today we're here for sentencing.
Dan DeWilde comes as close as he ever has to admitting he killed his wife.
I pled guilty to knowingly causing the death of another person.
He also agrees not to appeal.
You're giving up the right to appeal. Understand?
Judge Munch has nothing kind to say about the father who destroyed so many lives. including the children he claims to love.
He killed their mother. He did it brutally, and then he lied about it for years.
I'd just like to say that Daniel destroyed the life of his children. He destroyed the life of his own family members, all for unnecessary greed and ego that accomplished nothing.
Come on, you guys.
Not in the courtroom are the children. Jacob and Hannah are now teenagers, living with their grandparents, who are raising them the way they think their daughter would.
Do you sometimes think about how much she missed out on with her kids?
Of course.
Of course, yeah, all the time. I always think, how proud she'd be.
After almost a decade, Heather's family wonders if they'll finally hear from the man who caused so much heartache.
You have the right to say anything you want me to consider. Now, if you don't want to say anything, you don't have to.
Dan DeWilde has a chance to apologize, much like his twin brother did in the same courtroom weeks earlier.
David did apologize to the Springers.
I feel horrible about the pain. All I can say is I'm sorry. I'm just sorry for all the pain I've caused.
Daniel never did. Never did.
Is it true that you do not want to exercise that right?
That's true.
It would have taken nothing for Daniel at sentencing just to turn to the Springer family and just say, I'm sorry. It's just not in Daniel's character to do that.
Do you think Daniel feels any remorse?
No.
In fact, David DeWilde told investigator Russ Boatwright he believes Dan enjoyed inflicting pain on Heather's family.
He thought Daniel went to bed every night knowing that Dave Springer thought he killed his daughter and couldn't prove it. And he said Daniel, I know, got satisfaction from that.
The defendant then is remanded to be delivered to the Department of Corrections to serve his sentence.
Judge Munch sentences Dan DeWilde to 74 years in prison.
I'm glad he got the length of sentence he did, and he deserved more, but that's it.
It has taken Scott Story 8 years, his entire 2 terms as district attorney, to get justice for Heather.
Was it worth it?
Yes, absolutely worth it. Many times politicians can't fulfill their promises. This is one promise that was kept.
But the question remains, just how close did Dan DeWilde come to getting away with murder?
If David had not testified, if he had not turned on his brother, could you have convicted Dan?
Based on the evidence we saw, without that, I don't know that I could have.
I don't think any jury would have probably found him guilty.
Those 2 men would have gotten away with murder.
Probably.
Probably, yeah.
CBS Next.
We talk about her physical health. She was just a little spitfire. There are 17 impact wounds. It's passionate, it's premeditated, it's cold.
Must be some madman out there.
48 Hours Crime Time Double Feature continues next on CBS.
Stand by! Posse up!
What is cowboy action shooting?
Cowboy action shooting is a shooting discipline based on the guns of the Old West. The days of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. We dress, for the most part, in period-accurate clothing. Spurs and chaps. It's full competition, shooting steel targets with lead bullets.
Sounds like a blast.
It is literally a blast every time.
These are some very competitive shooters. Some top shooters in the world.
Now, everyone has an alias, right?
Correct.
A cowboy name.
My name is George Mann, and my alias in cowboy action shooting is Angus McNasty.
My alias is High Cotton Kitty.
Pony James.
Sassy Hammer.
Ray was known as Doc R. Green.
And how about Danny? What was her name?
Danny Oakley. She was Danny Oakley.
Like Annie Oakley.
Yeah, like Annie Oakley.
I taught them how to do cowboy action shooting. Danny was more proficient, more driven and focused. Ray, he was there just for the fun. Ray was funny.
You looked at him and you see Cowboy.
Put him on your horse and reins, right?
Yeah.
She was just the all-American type cowgirl, and she had the long pigtails. They seemed like, to me, the perfect couple, but you never know what's going on in a relationship.
Well, there was problems in the marriage, especially financial issues.
They had money, and then they lost everything.
The Sheriff's Department had received a call to investigate a complaint, and it was in regard to the residence of Ray Green and Danielle Green.
Danny said that her dog killed Ray.
We drove back through the barns, and as I got closer to the trailer, I observed multiple police cars, different agencies. And there were probably 15 guys that were out moving about the property.
And what were they doing?
They were looking for Ray Green.
She was sitting in a lawn chair. She said she had given consent to search for Ray and that she did not know where he was. She said, "You can search anywhere you want except for that box."
On May 28, 2014, police were called to this remote piece of property in Dillsboro, Indiana, the home of Danny and Ray Green.
I need to get some information on my son.
The Sheriff's Department had received a call from Ray's 84-year-old mother, Betty.
My daughter-in-law called this morning and said he was killed yesterday by a German Shepherd dog. The dog jumped up and grabbed his throat.
Danny had called other family and friends too, saying it was Jazzy, the couple's own pet, who had attacked Ray. Police drove out to check, but when they arrived, neither Ray nor Jazzy could be seen, and they say Danny seemed to be just going about her day.
She's interested in feeding her horses and just engaged in conversation like nothing else is going on.
Prosecutor Aaron Nagengard says Danny then gave an entirely different story, saying Ray, who sometimes worked as a truck driver, was out on the road.
The problem with that, there was a big truck in the property. The officers were suspicious that something was up. So the officers pinged his phone, and his phone came back to that piece of property.
And there was this, that padlocked toolbox sitting on the property. Danny refused to let anyone open it, so authorities set off to get a search warrant.
My grandmother had called me at work and told me that Danielle had said that the dog killed him.
Tracy Abbott is Ray's daughter with his first wife, Maggie.
Animals like him. How can a dog kill him?
Tracy remembers her father's special way with all kinds of animals growing up on their 200-acre San Antonio ranch.
My dad was a real cowboy.
Ray began his career riding bulls and bareback broncos. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. but it was the simple country life where he felt most at home.
He always wore his cowboy hat and boots. He never went anywhere without them.
Ray was a renowned horse breeder and trainer.
Had he developed a successful business?
Yes, he did. We had like 70-something horses.
Friends like Dave War remember Ray as a real straight shooter.
When you shook his hand, you knew you were shaking a man's hand. He was very powerful and very strong.
Bob Stevens, another friend of Ray's, remembers a time when Ray captured a 12-foot alligator with his own 2 hands.
We contacted animal control. They set up traps, and this gator was so big it would break the traps. Ray trapped it himself and put it in the barn.
Tracy says her parents, Ray and Maggie, had a loving relationship.
They were best friends. They known each other. My mom was 6 and he was 11. We were a close-knit family.
But that all ended in May of 2002 when Maggie was killed in a bridge collapse in Oklahoma. She was on her way home from a barrel race with her horses.
A barge slammed into a bridge along Interstate 40, punching nearly a dozen vehicles 75 feet into the water. Among the dead, horse trainer Maggie Green.
Ray, who had called Maggie his Rose, was left devastated.
He kept saying, "I miss my Rose. I miss my Rose." His light went out.
A lawsuit was filed on behalf of the victims. As a result, the Green family received a large sum of money.
There was a pretty big settlement that he had gotten, a little over $1 million.
When did Danielle come into your father's life?
Abruptly. She came in the picture maybe 2 months after my mother died.
Danielle, who went by Danny, was a longtime client of Ray's. A skilled horsewoman herself, Danny hired Ray back in 1996 to train her horses. Soon after Maggie's death, Tracy says, a newly divorced Danny started hanging around the ranch every day.
Ray didn't chase her. She came into Ray's life and, said the things that Ray wanted to hear. So that blossomed into a relationship.
Danny, 22 years younger than Ray, seemed to provide the companionship he needed after losing his wife and helped him move on.
They took a vacation and came back married. I was happy that he was happy.
But Tracy was not happy with Danny.
She would come out wearing my mother's cowboy hats and her nice cowboy boots and some of my mom's jewelry.
After Danny solidified her place in Ray's life, she set her sights on her equestrian dreams.
Her goal in life was to get into the Olympics in dressage. So she did some research, and ground zero for dressage in the Olympics was Palm Beach County.
The newlyweds decided to move to Florida, using the $1 million settlement from Maggie's death.
This was the property owned by Ray and Danielle Green. They owned this 5-acre lot and the 5-acre lot to the east of us.
The house was near the stables where Danny could train.
The U.S. trials for the Olympics were held in Deer Run, and she wanted to be a part of that.
And was she talented?
She was very talented. Ray built her a workout room in the house that she'd get up at 5 o'clock and she'd spend all day just doing horse trainings. She would be on the horses from sunup to sundown.
And when she wasn't in the saddle, they discovered that fun and unusual hobby.
After Danny and Ray got married and moved here to Florida, they got interested in cowboy action shooting. Part target competition, part costume fun, they would travel to events like this one.
Howdy, y'all having a good morning? Yeah! All right, start off with the pledge.
Don Owen runs the event.
I pledge allegiance to the flag. We have competitors from every walks of life. We have attorneys, we have surgeons, we have electricians. The people are what makes it. Danny
Oakley and Doc R. Green were both beloved here.
They were a huge part of the family, an amazing cowboy. Great part of our family.
These big matches are like a reunion. It's fun to see everybody again and catch up.
Friends Karen and Jerry O'Clair say Danny was a natural.
Put him on your horse's reins, right?
Yeah.
And she quickly became the top shooter at the club.
She really could handle a gun.
Oh, yeah. And at the time, I was the top shooter of the club, and she just soared right by me.
She wanted to win.
Life in Florida seemed like a winning proposition for both Danny and Ray. But that was about to change.
This is like a little piece of heaven. It's quiet, surrounded by woods.
Bob Stevens says Danny and Ray's neighborhood near West Palm Beach had become a perfect refuge when they arrived in 2004.
All these houses were designed so you couldn't see a neighbor's house. It has 22 miles of horse trails that don't intersect with any roads.
After the Dow dropped 18% last week and the S&P 500...
But the dream died in 2008 when the economy collapsed.
It was just devastating for Ray. The horsing market fell apart, dressage fell apart. They were using the second mortgage to pay the first mortgage, and it was just a disaster.
For a while, Danny and Ray struggled to keep up their lifestyle, still attending their cowboy action shooting matches, but now trying to make a bit of money on the side, off the livestock they kept at the ranch.
The chickens would lay eggs, and she would bring eggs for everybody. The people would buy the eggs.
Danny and Ray caught a break when they were hired by their own neighborhood to become landscapers.
Had the contract to take care of the right-of-ways, mow the grass, take care of the ditches.
Did you get any sense that Danny felt like that was a real step down in their lives, that he's now cutting grass?
I don't think so. I don't think she was like that. She was not materialistic. She was not status-driven.
Ray's daughter, Tracy, disagrees.
I believe that the only reason why she wanted to marry my father was for his money.
Tracy didn't know her father had lost all his money. After he moved to Florida, Tracy mysteriously couldn't reach him.
He would ask me, "How come you never call me? I miss you."
Turns out Ray and Danny shared a single cell phone, and Danny blocked Tracy's number.
I got this message saying, "This phone is no longer taking calls from this number." She had blocked my emails and letters. I sent him a certified Christmas card with pictures of his grandbabies, and it came back denied.
Why would she do that? That seems cruel.
Very cruel. It really broke my heart not to have my father in my life anymore. But that was her way of keeping all the money to herself.
The money, now all gone. The $1 million settlement Ray received after Tracy's mother was killed in that bridge collapse.
To lose my mother the way I did, and then now being separated from my father, it was very heartbreaking.
Heartbreak spilled over to Danny's side of the family as well. While she'd achieved some success on the local horse show scene, her Olympic dreams remained elusive. Then in 2012, Danny received devastating news from her Indiana family home.
Both of her parents were terminally ill.
They both had cancer at the same time.
Yes.
I think she felt that that was her place to go up and take care of them. And besides, there was no place for them down here anymore.
So Danny and Ray sold their Florida property at a big loss. With the landscaping contract their only source of income, Ray stayed behind, mowing grass and living with a friend. Dave War remembers the day Danny headed north.
Ray had asked a couple of his friends to come over and help them load some of the big items out of their house into a moving van. He had misplaced the box that had his personal items in it.
Dave says Ray asked Danny if she'd seen the box.
And she went off on him, berating him, belittling him in front of everybody. I made the comment to my friend. This comment haunts me to this day. It wouldn't surprise me if she doesn't kill him one day.
Dave says Ray's paychecks got sent directly to Danny back home in Indiana.
I seen him literally live off of cold cereal. He would make a meal out of bread and water if he had to, because he had no money to live.
There was one bright spot during this troubled time. Tracy was able to reestablish a relationship with her father, who at last got his own cell phone.
We finally got to talk almost every day. We were able to finally have a relationship again.
Bob Stevens gave Ray a special gift, an airplane ticket and the chance to reconnect with his family in Texas.
I gave him the trip on his birthday, and he flew out there, and he had a great time with his daughter and granddaughters.
I felt like I could not let him go. I just would hug him forever. And happy tears, 'cause I was so glad to see him.
In 2013, both of Danny's parents passed away, and Ray's landscaping contract expired. Danny was poised to come into an inheritance.
The parents owned 300 acres up in a mountain. There was 3 children. They were each going to get 100 acres. It had a farmhouse on it that needed to be renovated.
So Ray moved to Indiana and joined Danny, living in a trailer on the large property.
She was in control anytime she's around my father, so moving back to be with her, I felt I was never going to hear from him again.
Danny planned on running the property as a horse farm. Ray found work as well.
Ray decided to get his trucker's license so they would have a form of steady income.
By the end of 2013, Ray and Danny were together again, but they were about to break apart, at least on paper.
He qualified for Social Security with his first wife, who died in the bridge accident.
Ray would be able to collect Social Security as Maggie's widower, but he'd have to divorce Danny to do it.
So they got divorced for more income.
Not that he didn't want to be with his wife anymore, but to get Social Security money.
Yes.
In the spring of 2014, Ray and Danny had started a new chapter together in Indiana. But it all ended with that shocking message to family and friends.
Danny said that her dog killed Ray.
In May 2014, Ray Green's mother, Betty, made that call to an Indiana Sheriff's Department near Dillsboro, saying she'd heard the strangest story from Danny.
Said the dog killed my son yesterday, a German Shepherd dog. Why would she call me with such a story if it didn't happen?
When police arrived, neither Ray nor Jazzy could be found. That set off some red flags.
State detectives were called in after local police concluded there was something not quite right with this remote Indiana property. What started out as a missing person wellness check would soon become something far worse.
As an all-out search got underway, detectives say Danny cooperated fully, except for that one thing.
She said, "You can search anywhere you want except for that box."
That box being this box.
One of those big toolboxes that you put in the back of a truck.
Large, made of metal, sitting several yards away from the entrance to Ray and Danny's trailer.
She said it was Ray's box and she couldn't give consent for anyone to look in it.
It had a padlock on it, but it wasn't completely closed on one end. And there were flies, and then there was an odor of decay.
Within hours, Baxter and Tressler obtained a search warrant for the box. When it was opened, Ray Green was found dead inside it. Detectives returned to Danny, telling her they were done with their search.
And when you told her we found him, how does she react?
She really had no reaction. She was like, okay.
That's when detectives say Danny's story of what happened to Ray changed yet again, now saying she'd been forced to shoot Ray dead 2 days before in self-defense.
She began to explain that there were instances of abuse, that this had began in Florida, wound up here.
She kind of quickly glossed over the actual shooting of Ray and went right to why she had to do it.
The detectives recorded an interview with Danny on the property. She told them Ray had been physically abusive for years and tried to force sex on her several times in the days leading up to the shooting.
He walked around naked, slept naked, walked around naked all the time. He's pulling me to him. He's like, let's go lay down. He's trying to force himself on me. I don't want this, but I don't know what to do.
She claimed Ray retaliated each time she refused him.
He'd come up behind me and put his arm around my neck, and he was squeezing me incredibly hard. I couldn't breathe.
Danny told the detective she slept on the living room couch, alone. That led to another confrontation.
He came in and he laid right on top of me. He had his forearm pressed against my neck, pushing on me, and I was like, what are you doing? I'm kind of gasping for air, and he's like, I just wanted to hug you. You don't hug people with your arm in their throat like that.
Danny said it all led up to a fatal clash early on Monday, May 26, Memorial Day. 3 days later, she went on tape with investigators, offering a unique demonstration in a calm, matter-of-fact way.
I'm just going to play the role of Ray.
So you've offered to place your body in various positions as she takes us through what happened.
Yes.
I had come in the bathroom. It was...
Danny says it was around 6 a.m. She just used the bathroom off the master bedroom and was headed back to the couch.
So I'm tiptoeing and I'm being really quiet, and Ray gets up from the bed and he says, I'm going to kill you. You need to die.
Danny says Ray kept a loaded .38 on the nightstand. She says he started to reach for the gun.
I grabbed the gun and I took his shoulder like this, and I grabbed him like this and tried to get him off balance and threw him on the bed like this. He fell more on his right side, actually totally on his right side. His legs were up, and as I fell on him like this, my hand, I don't know if you can see, my hand was like this.
At that moment, Danny shot Ray 5 times. He took 5 bullets to the torso.
And I don't remember pulling the trigger. I don't remember pointing. I don't remember hearing gunshots, but...
Danny says the struggle continued.
He started sliding down the bed, and his legs were here on this side of the bed, facing the wall.
Sitting?
Yes. And then I got really scared because he said, I'm going to kill you, but he's whispering.
That's when Danny says she ran to the back bedroom of the trailer and grabbed 5 more bullets.
And I unloaded the gun, and I said, what do I do? I'm scared to death. I'm in fear for my life.
She returned to Ray, who she says somehow was still sitting upright at the foot of the bed.
And he started to kind of crouch over and lean towards me. So I put my hand out, and he started to get up a little bit, but I don't remember pulling the trigger and hearing the gun, but I remember him going down.
Danny says Ray collapsed on the bedroom floor, dead. 5 bullets in the head.
She reenacted every step of that morning in the location where it occurred to the detectives.
Delmar Weldon is Danny's attorney.
That is incredibly compelling evidence that she was telling the truth. The volcano that exploded on those early morning hours. And that's what led to Raymond attacking Danielle, and that's what forced Danielle to use lethal force to protect herself.
What do you make of Danny's account? Go inside the investigation of Ray Green's death at 48hours.com.
As a cowboy action shooter, Danny Green learned to quickly shoot 5 rounds, reload, and shoot 5 more. A skill she put to use on that remote mountaintop in Indiana on May 26, 2014. Detectives confirmed her father's death to Tracy, telling her Ray's body had been found in that toolbox.
My heart was in pieces, and I just prayed that he didn't suffer.
8 days after the shooting, after the medical examiner ruled Ray Green's death a homicide, Danny was arrested and charged with his murder. An autopsy found that all 10 bullets, the lower velocity kind used in cowboy action shooter competitions, were still in his body.
It was a shock. It blew me away. Because they're, two good people in my mind.
Word of Ray's death quickly spread in the cowboy action shooter family, including Dave War.
Well, Ray was more than just a shooter. I mean, he was a personal friend of mine.
It was pretty devastating.
What state of mind she was in that led her to do that, who knows?
This man, Delmar Weldon, believes he knows Weldon is Danny's defense attorney.
Danielle was attacked. She was in danger.
I'm in fear for my life.
She had to act to save her own life.
Unloaded, then reloaded.
Weldon says it's clear from just looking at the tape.
I remember seeing blood.
Danny cooperated with investigators.
And did not appear to be breathing.
Recreating what happened that morning, proving she had nothing to hide.
Her description of what happened really never changed. It was very, very, very consistent. Compelling evidence that she was telling the truth.
And what about Danny's changing stories of where Ray was?
Saying the dog killed him, saying he's at work when clearly he's not. Having him in a box feet away from their home. These actions were so ridiculous. They were not evidence of trying to hide the crime, they were evidence of trauma.
But investigators disagreed. They combed through Danny's emails, texts, and Skype conversations and concluded she may have had another man in her sights, a well-heeled cowboy action shooter that she and Ray knew quite well.
My name is George Mann, and my alias in cowboy action shooting is Angus Pugnasty.
George Mann had known the Greens for years, but when Danny moved to Indiana in 2012 to help take care of her sick parents, she started a secret internet relationship with George, who was married at the time.
And one day out of the blue, I get an email. We ended up calling, and we just kind of clicked off.
Investigators learned that George and Danny communicated nearly every day, sometimes multiple times a day.
It wasn't X-rated explicit, it was sexually suggestive.
Curled up by a fire under a blanket with nothing on underneath the blanket, sipping on hot chocolate. Can you top that? And you replied, nothing can top that. Wish I were there.
Well, you have to understand, attractive women, I tend to be a little bit more flirtatious than I should be.
Even though George had never traveled to Indiana to visit Danny, the investigative team wondered if the two had fallen in love online and whether that relationship played any role in Danny's decision to shoot her husband.
Do you think a part of you was in love with Danny?
No. I mean, Danny is a nice person. In love with Danny? No, I don't think so.
And I recall asking him specifically about his feelings for her. And he admitted in his own words that he loved her.
That he loved Danielle?
Yes.
George says Danny dreamed of leaving Ray and raising and selling horses in Ocala, Florida.
In early 2014, Danny and Ray divorced. Did you know that was coming?
I knew that was coming, yes. She saw that as a way to get away from Ray eventually. She wanted a new life without Ray.
So the motive is she needed to get rid of Ray because he was standing in the way of her dream. She believed George Mann was the person who would help her fulfill her dreams.
I say he made that up. Well, I'm just going to say it. It's a complete lie.
When investigators searched Danny's computer, they believe they found evidence that she was using Google to research how she would kill Ray.
What happens when you shoot a guy in the head with a .38, which was pretty damning considering she shot a guy in the head with a .38.
She's on a remote property. You're a mile from the nearest person. No one's going to hear you scream. So we were talking about self-defense. She was doing research on things that we had discussed.
As Danny Green's trial for murder was about to begin, her defense team finds a witness who could be a game changer, someone they believe will back up her claim that Ray had physically abused her.
Did you ever witness anything out of the ordinary when you delivered mail?
I mean, other than her wearing a sling occasionally, limping at times, black eyes? Yes.
We're speaking now with a woman we're going to call Carol. Tell me about when you learned that Ray Green had died and had been shot by Danny.
He got what he deserved.
This woman, whose face and name 48 Hours has agreed to conceal, claims she is certain Ray physically abused Danny in Florida.
How did you know Ray and Danny?
I delivered their mail.
Carol and Danny became friendly over the years.
She was a gentle person that loved her animals.
Carol says Danny never told her that Ray was abusing her, but Carol saw the injuries on Danny's face.
I saw 3 to 4 different times when she had the black eyes.
And did you see bruises in other places?
You couldn't see the bruises because she was so covered up.
Carol found it unusual that despite Florida's high heat and humidity, Danny covered every inch of her body.
She would try to tell me that she had fallen or that one of the horses had done it.
What were you thinking?
That she was being abused physically.
And the Ray Green Carol got to know was not the gentle cowboy described by others.
I asked him to sign something. He told me no. He said, go see Danny, and he called me a bitch. So from that point on, I avoided him.
George Mann, Danny's online friend, says she once told him that Ray had attacked her.
They had an argument in Florida, and he grabbed her and threw her against the wall. I think she truly feared Ray.
But other friends who were close to the couple say they never witnessed any signs of abuse.
I never seen any personality trait that would show me that Ray was an abusive husband at all. No black eyes or bruises or anything.
But what about Danny covering every inch of her body with clothing? Bob Stevens, who is working on a book about the case, says he knows why.
She was very, very worried about sun damage and cancer. I know from a fact that she wore long sleeve shirts to protect her from the sun.
In August of 2015, Danny's murder trial began at the Ohio County, Indiana courthouse. No cameras were allowed in the courtroom.
We have some of the key pieces of evidence. You have the revolver, it's a .38, which was the weapon that was used.
Prosecutor Aaron Nagengard says some of the bullets fired passed through this blanket before striking Ray.
There were 3 bullet holes, and this one actually went in there and out here. It showed that he was sleeping at the time.
And that's significant because she is claiming self-defense.
Correct.
But Danny's attorney, Delmar Weldon, says the blanket tells a very different story.
It wouldn't be uncommon for someone to get out of bed and have a blanket around them.
I think that'd be highly unusual. He's about to attack her. He was lunging toward her, wrapped in a heavy blanket.
Danielle said exactly what happened.
I remember him going down
Onto the floor
with his head in this area.
What Danny didn't tell police was that she cut out a piece of carpet from the trailer floor.
There's clear blood here.
And put it in the toolbox where Ray's body was found.
How is it self-defense if you're cutting carpet out, putting a body in the box, and trying to destroy or hide evidence?
And if Danny killed in self-defense, why didn't she call 911 after shooting Ray 10 times?
To second guess the things that happen in a moment like that, this life or death moment, it is very unfair to say, why wouldn't you do this? She believed that he could come back and get her, even after he was obviously dead.
Like some horror movie, rise from the dead and come after her?
She was living in a horror movie.
Carol, the mail carrier, gave a deposition that was read to jurors, but investigators said they found no evidence supporting Danny's claims of abuse.
Do you have any proof whatsoever, beyond your belief, that he actually laid a fist on her face?
No.
Danny never took the stand, but jurors watched her version of what happened on that deadly morning.
I'm in fear for my life.
After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury got the case, and deliberations stretched on for 8 hours.
So they come in. What's the verdict?
Guilty.
Danny Green was convicted of murder and sentenced to 60 years in prison.
I believe the jury got it wrong. I believe that Danielle Green is innocent.
And do you think justice was served?
By him being killed, yes. By her being in prison, no.
The nicest man that would do anything for anyone suffered execution style. She was a monster.
Jazzy, the family dog, who Danny once said attacked and killed Ray, has never been found. Dave War's world, without his friend Ray, is just not the same.
I think you go through life with very few true friends. There's a big void in that circle that'll never be replaced.
How do you want your father to be remembered?
A wonderful, loving, caring man. A great grandfather. He was a great husband to my mother.
Ray and his first wife, Maggie, both died on May 26th, exactly 12 years apart. Bob Stevens thinks that's more than just a coincidence.
A message from God. I think it was a sign from God that they're back together.
A son accused of having his parents killed. The motive? Money for a house and cosmetic surgery.
I got a text, "You're getting a boob job for Christmas, LOL."
So why doesn't his sister believe it?
I think there's a lot more to this story.
48 Hours, Saturday at 10/9 Central on CBS.